Los Angeles pulsed with life. The streets, lined with flickering neon signs and bustling cafes, were alive with the chatter of people from all walks of life. The scent of fresh espresso from a nearby coffee shop mixed with the sharp tang of gasoline as cars zipped past. The city was both mesmerizing and exhausting, a place that never slept, never stopped, never paused to take a breath. Keanu Reeves preferred walking at night. There was something calming about it, something peaceful in the way the city slowed down just enough for him to blend in with the crowd. For most people he was an icon, a celebrity, a movie star, a legend. But for him, these quiet walks were the only times he could just be Keanu, a man in search of something real. After a long day of meetings and rehearsals, he wandered through the quieter, grittier streets of LA, where the glitz of Hollywood faded into something more raw, more honest. These places reminded him of his younger days, when he had struggled, when life had been uncertain, when he had learned to appreciate every small kindness. Then he saw her. A woman sat on the sidewalk outside a small, dusty bookstore, her figure curled inward against the biting chill of the evening. Her tattered clothing barely shielded her from the cold. In front of her lay a small cardboard sign, the words written in shaky, uneven handwriting. "Anything helps. God bless." At first, Keanu barely glanced at her. The homeless were a common sight in the city, a tragic reality he had long since grown accustomed to. He always tried to help, whether it was through charities or quiet donations. But something about this woman made him stop in his tracks. He turned back, his heart hammering against his ribs. There was something eerily familiar about her. Her hunched posture, the delicate way she held her hands, the dark hair streaked with gray that framed her weary face. Then he saw her eyes. Deep brown, warm yet distant, filled with stories untold. Keanu's breath caught in his throat. Isabella? The woman flinched at the sound of her name, lifting her gaze. For a long moment, she simply stared at him, her tired eyes widening in shock. Then, in a voice so soft it nearly disappeared into the hum of the city, she whispered, "Keanu?" Time stood still. Isabella Ramirez. The woman who had once been a second mother to him. She had cared for him when he was young, when his real mother had been too busy working to make ends meet. Isabella had cooked his meals, tucked him into bed, wiped away his tears when life had been too cruel. She had been his safe haven, his warmth, his home. And now she was here, alone, forgotten by the world. Keanu dropped to his knees in front of her, his hands trembling as he reached out. "Isabella, what happened? How did you end up here?" Isabella's lips quivered, but for a long moment she said nothing. Tears welled in her eyes, slipping down her weathered cheeks. "I never thought I'd see you again," she finally whispered. Keanu squeezed her hands gently, feeling how frail and cold they were. "I'm here now. Tell me everything." Isabella inhaled shakily, gathering the pieces of a story she had buried for so long. Life had not been kind to Isabella after Keanu had grown up and moved away. She had continued working as a nanny for other families, but as the years passed, jobs became harder to find. The children she cared for grew up, and younger nannies took her place. One by one the doors closed. Then came the illness. Her husband had fallen gravely sick. The medical bills piled up, each one heavier than the last. Isabella had sold everything, their car, their furniture, even her wedding ring, to pay for his treatment. But it hadn't been enough. In the end she had lost him. And with him she had lost everything else. Without money or family to turn to, Isabella had been evicted from her apartment. She had tried to find work, but no one wanted to hire an elderly woman with aching joints and tired hands. The world moved too fast, leaving her behind. "I thought I could survive on my own," she said, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to be a burden to anyone." Keanu's chest tightened. The woman who had once carried him through his hardest days was now alone, cast aside by the same world she had spent her life serving. "No, you wouldn't allow this." He exhaled sharply, his jaw set with quiet determination. "Isabella, listen to me. You're not alone anymore. I won't let you go through this." Isabella shook her head weakly. "Keanu, I don't want pity." He tightened his grip on her hands. "This isn't a pity. This is love. You were there for me when I needed you. Now it's my turn." A sob escaped her lips as she clung to him. For the first time in years, she felt something she thought she had lost forever. "Oh." Keanu stood up, gently pulling her with him. "Come with me." Isabella hesitated. "Where?" Keanu met her gaze, his voice steady. "Home." Keanu didn't take her to a shelter or a hotel. He took her to his home, a quiet, peaceful house away from the noise of the city. As they stepped inside, Isabella froze in the doorway, her fingers clutching the fabric of her thin shawl. "I can't stay here," she whispered. "It's too much." Keanu sighed, stepping beside her. "Isabella, it's just a house. A house means nothing without family. And that's what you are." Her lips trembled. "But I have nothing to give you in return." He gently took her hands. "You already gave me more than I could ever repay. Let me do this." For the first time in years, Isabella allowed herself to breathe. The next morning, Keanu made Isabella a warm breakfast, freshly scrambled eggs, toast, and tea. She watched him with a small, disbelieving smile. "I never knew you could cook." Keanu chuckled. "I had to learn. Can't live off takeout forever." She took a bite, savoring the warmth. "It's been a long time since I had a meal like this." Keanu watched her, his heart heavy. "Isabella, I don't just want to give you a place to stay. I want to help you rebuild." Isabella sighed. "Keanu, I'm too old to start over." He shook his head. "It's never too late." Tears welled in her eyes. "What would I even do?" Keanu smiled. "What did you love before life got in the way?" Isabella hesitated, then whispered, "I always loved sewing. I used to dream of being a seamstress." Keanu grinned. "Then let's make that happen." For the first time in years, Isabella believed it was possible. Weeks passed and Isabella's life transformed. Keanu helped her get medical care, find her strength again, and, most importantly, rekindle the dream she thought she had lost. With his support, she started making clothes again, one stitch at a time. One day, as she worked on a delicate fabric, she turned to Keanu and whispered, "I feel like myself again." Keanu squeezed her hand. "That's all I ever wanted." Isabella wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Keanu kept his promise. He stayed by Isabella's side every single day. He didn't just give her a place to stay, he gave her kindness, friendship, and hope. He never made her feel like she owed him anything. He treated her like family, just like he always had. For Isabella, that was the best gift of all. She was learning to trust again. Even though Keanu's home was warm and safe, Isabella still felt guilty. For a long time, she believed she didn't deserve kindness. She thought life had decided she would always struggle. She had learned to accept it, to live with it, without expecting anything better. So now that someone was helping her, she didn't know how to take it. She felt like she had to do something in return. Every morning, Isabella woke up early to clean and cook, even though Keanu told her she didn't have to. One morning, as she was putting clean dishes away, she heard Keanu's voice behind her. "Isabella," he said gently, leaning against the doorway, "you don't have to do that." Isabella turned around, looking flustered. "Keanu, I can't just sit here while you do everything for me. I need to help. I need to do something." Keanu walked over and placed a soft but firm hand on her shoulder. "Isabella, listen to me. You are not a burden. You don't have to prove anything. Just having you here, safe and happy, is all that matters to me." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "You took care of me when I needed it," Keanu continued, his voice warm and full of love. "Now it's my turn to take care of you. No conditions. No expectations. Just because I love you." Isabella took a shaky breath. She wasn't used to being loved for no reason. But maybe, just maybe, she could learn. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself accept it. Facing the past. Even though Isabella's body was getting stronger with good food and rest, her heart still felt heavy. Keanu noticed. He saw how sometimes she would stare out the window, lost in thought. He saw how she tensed up when they walked through certain streets. He noticed how her hands shook when she saw homeless people sitting on the sidewalks. One evening, as they sat outside drinking tea while the sun was setting, Keanu asked, "What's on your mind, Isabella?" She hesitated before answering. "Nothing really. Just memories." Keanu set down his tea and looked at her. "Talk to me." Isabella took a deep breath. "I'm grateful, Keanu. More than I can say. But a part of me still feels stuck in my old life. The streets, they changed me. The people I met, the things I saw. I can't just forget." Keanu nodded. He understood. He knew what it was like to carry pain and memories that wouldn't let go. "You don't have to forget, Isabella," he said softly. "But you can heal. You don't have to be trapped in the past to honor where you've been." She looked at him, unsure. "But how?" Keanu took a deep breath, then suggested something that would change everything. "Let's go back." Isabella's heart stopped. "Back?" she whispered. Keanu nodded. "Not to stay. Just to face it. To see how far you've come. Maybe to help others who are still there." Isabella's fingers tightened around her cup. Could she do that? Could she go back to the place where she had been so lost, now as someone who had been saved? Would it break her? Or would it set her free? She wasn't sure. But she knew one thing, she wouldn't have to do it alone. Returning to the streets. The next day, Keanu drove Isabella back to the part of the city where he had found her. She had spent years struggling to survive on these streets. Now she was coming back as someone who had been given a second chance. As they walked, Isabella's chest felt tight. She saw familiar faces, people she had shared food with, people she had slept next to under bridges and bus stops, people who had lost hope just like she once had. And they saw her too. One man, Henry, an old friend from the streets, stared at her in shock. Isabella? She smiled softly. Hi, Henry. His eyes moved over her, noticing her clean clothes, her healthier body, and the light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. You got out, he whispered. Isabella nodded, her throat tight. Yes, someone found me. Someone helped me. Henry looked at Keanu and his eyes widened. No way. Keanu? Keanu smiled. Hey man. Henry's mouth fell open. You're the one who helped Isabella? Keanu nodded. Henry shook his head in disbelief. She used to talk about you, you know. She told us stories about the kid she used to take care of. But I never thought. His voice trailed off, thick with emotion. Isabella felt tears in her eyes. She had spent so long thinking she had been forgotten. But here was proof she hadn't been. Isabella talked with her old friends for hours, listening to their stories. She realized something important. She wasn't just someone who had escaped homelessness. She was someone who could make a difference. As they walked back to the car, Isabella turned to Keanu, a new fire in her eyes. I want to help them, she said. I want to do for them what you did for me. Keanu smiled. He had known this moment would come. Then let's do it, he said. And so, a new mission began. Isabella wasn't just rebuilding her life. She was about to change the lives of many. As Keanu drove home, Isabella stared out the window thinking about the people she had just seen. Their tired eyes, their quiet voices. She had been one of them not long ago. And now she couldn't just walk away. Finally she spoke. Keanu, I don't want to just start over. I want to help them. Keanu nodded. He had been waiting for her to say that. I know, he said. And you can. Isabella hesitated. But how? I have no money, no resources, nothing to offer except my own experience. Keanu pulled the car over and looked at her. Isabella, you have something even more valuable than money. You understand them. You know what it's like to live on the streets, to feel invisible, to struggle when everything is against you. That's something most people don't understand. Isabella swallowed hard. He was right. She did understand. Keanu smiled. You used to sew, right? You wanted to be a seamstress? Isabella nodded slowly. A long time ago. Then let's use that, Keanu said. Let's start something where you can teach other homeless women how to sew. How to create something of their own. Something that can help them get back on their feet. Isabella's eyes widened. Do you think that could actually work? Keanu's expression was firm. I know it will. For the first time in years, Isabella felt like she had a purpose again. The next morning, Isabella woke up with determination. She wasn't going to just sit around and let Keanu do everything. She was going to be part of the solution. Keanu reached out to some contacts, and within days they found a small space in the city. It was an old tailor's shop, abandoned for years. The floors were scratched, the walls were faded, and the air smelled like dust. But Isabella didn't see a broken building. She saw the possibility. This is perfect, she whispered. Keanu chuckled. It will be once we fix it up. And so they got to work. Isabella and the women touched the fabric in front of them. Some had never sewn a stitch before. Others had once known how to sew, but life had been hard, and they had lost everything. Isabella walked from table to table, helping them, showing them what to do, and telling them they could do it. At first, the women were nervous. They were afraid of making mistakes. But as time passed, the fear went away. The room filled with the soft sound of sewing machines. There was quiet laughter. The women started to believe in themselves again. They were not just homeless anymore. They were making something beautiful. And Isabella, she felt happy again. A few weeks later, Keanu visited the workshop. He looked around and smiled. The room was full of energy. Fabric was spread across the tables. The women were sewing, learning, and talking. There was happiness in the air. Isabella saw Keanu and smiled. Look at them, she said, pointing at the women. They are not just surviving anymore. They are building something. Keanu nodded. It's because of you. Isabella shook her head. No, it's because of all of us. Keanu laughed. You're always so stubborn. Isabella smirked. And you are always too kind. They stood together and watched the women work. Then Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a small golden pin. It was shaped like a needle and thread. Isabella raised an eyebrow. "What is this?" Keanu grinned. "A symbol of what you are creating. A reminder that the strongest things in life are the ones that are woven together." Isabella took the pin and held it tightly. For a long time, she had felt like she had nothing left to give. But standing here, in this place filled with hope and second chances, she realized the truth. She had so much to give. Months later, the sewing workshop had grown bigger than Isabella had ever dreamed. Women who had once felt lost were now finding jobs. They were selling the clothes they made. They were rebuilding their lives. Isabella had gone from someone struggling to survive to someone leading others. She is a teacher now. She gave others hope. And Keanu? He had done what he always did. He had helped without asking for anything in return. One night, after Isabella locked up the workshop, she turned to Keanu and smiled. "I used to think I was forgotten," she said. Keanu smiled softly. "You were never forgotten, Isabella. You were just waiting to be found." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. She had spent so many years feeling lost. But now she was helping others find themselves. As they stood under the soft glow of the city lights, Isabella felt at peace. Her past no longer made her sad, because she had turned it into something beautiful. Isabella stood in the sewing workshop. She watched the women around her stitching fabric, putting patterns together and fixing mistakes. But they weren't just sewing. They were stitching their lives back together too. When she first opened the workshop, many of the women had been afraid. They didn't believe in themselves. They had been where she once was, homeless, alone, and scared. But now their eyes were full of light. They had hope. Isabella saw it in Rosa, who had come in on the first day angry and full of doubt. She had thought this workshop was just another empty promise. But now, Rosa was one of the best seamstresses. She was teaching the new women who joined. She saw it in Naomi, who had spent years on the streets after running away from a dangerous home. Naomi had once been too scared to even talk to people. But now she was sewing beautiful designs and laughing as she worked. And Isabella saw it in herself. Once she had been broken. She had been ashamed of her past. But now she was something new. She was a leader. One afternoon, Isabella was at her desk looking through sketches and orders. The small sewing business had grown out of the workshop. Women were selling what they made, and the money was helping them live better lives. Then there was a knock on the door. She turned to see Keanu standing there with a knowing smile. "You're busy," he said, glancing at the hard-working women. Isabella smiled. "It's a good kind of busy." Keanu stepped inside, looking around with admiration. "I knew you would do something amazing with this place." Isabella shook her head. She still felt humbled by everything that had happened. "I couldn't have done it without you, Keanu." He raised an eyebrow. "That's not true. I gave you a chance, but you built this. You turned pain into something powerful." Isabella looked down, feeling emotional. He was right. But it was still hard to believe. Then Keanu pulled something from his pocket, a small envelope. "What's this?" Isabella asked, taking it. Keanu smirked. "An invitation." Isabella carefully opened the envelope. Her eyes widened when she read the words inside. "Los Angeles Philanthropy Gala. Special honoree, Isabella Ramirez." Isabella's heart stopped. She looked up at Keanu, her hands shaking. "Why is my name on this?" Keanu chuckled. "Because you're changing lives, Isabella. And people are starting to notice." Isabella blinked. I can't do this. I don't belong to some fancy gala with rich people." Keanu shook his head. "Yes, you do. More than anyone. These people need to hear your story. They need to see that homelessness is not the end. They need to know that with the right help, people can rebuild their lives. And who better to tell them than you?" Isabella took a deep breath. The thought of standing on a stage telling her story to powerful people scared her. But deep down she knew Keanu was right. If she could make even one person see the truth, then maybe things could change. She nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." Keanu grinned. "That's my Isabella." The night of the gala arrived faster than Isabella had expected. She stood in front of a mirror in Keanu's house, staring at the beautiful, simple navy blue dress. It was a gift from Keanu. The women from the workshop had sewn it for her as a thank you. As she ran her fingers over the stitching, she thought about how much had changed. Just months ago, she had been sleeping on the streets, cold and hungry. Now she was about to walk into a room full of people who had the power to help others like her. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was a voice. Keanu knocked on the door and peeked in. "You ready?" Isabella turned to him, her eyes full of worry. I don't know if I can do this, Keanu. He walked up to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. Isabella, you've already done the hardest thing. You survived. This is just telling your story. She let out a shaky breath. What if they don't listen? Keanu smiled. Then we make them listen. He offered her his arm. Let's go change some lives. The gala was grand and fancy, just as Isabella had imagined. People in expensive clothes sipped drinks and chatted. At first, Isabella felt out of place. But then she saw Keanu talking to people, introducing her, making sure everyone knew who she was. Slowly the fear faded. When it was her turn to speak, she took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The room fell silent. Isabella's hands shook, but she saw the women from her workshop in her mind. She saw Rosa and Naomi and herself. And she spoke. She told them about being invisible, about how it felt to be homeless, about how Keanu found her and reminded her that she was still worth something. She told them about the workshop and the women rebuilding their lives. When she finished, the room was silent. Then people began to stand. Applause filled the ballroom. People wiped their eyes. Isabella let out a breath. She had done it. She had made them listen. Isabella looked down, her feelings tight in her throat. Keanu was right, but it was still hard for her to believe it. Then Keanu took something from his pocket. It was a small, fancy envelope. What is this? Isabella asked, taking it from him. Keanu smiled. An invitation. She carefully opened it. When she read the words inside, she gasped. Los Angeles Philanthropy Gala. Special honoree, Isabella Ramirez. Isabella's heart stopped. She looked up at Keanu, her hands shaking. Why is my name on here? Keanu chuckled. Because you are changing lives, Isabella. And people are starting to notice. Isabella blinked, unsure. I can't do this. I don't belong at a fancy event with rich people. Yes, you do, Keanu said firmly. You belong there more than anyone. These people need to hear your story. They need to understand that being homeless isn't the end. They need to see that with help, people can rebuild their lives. And who better to show them than you? Isabella swallowed hard. The thought of standing on a stage talking to a room full of rich and important people scared her. But deep down, she knew Keanu was right. If her story could help even one person see homeless people as real people, maybe things could change. She took a deep breath and nodded. Okay, I'll do it. Keanu grinned. That's my Isabella. The night of the gala came much faster than Isabella expected. She stood in front of a mirror at Keanu's house, staring at a beautiful, simple navy blue dress. Keanu had given it to her. But even more special, the dress had been made by the women in her workshop. It was their way of saying thank you to her. She ran her fingers over the soft fabric. So much had changed. Just a few months ago, she had been sleeping on the streets, cold and hungry. Now she was about to walk into a room full of people who had the power to change the world. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was a voice. Keanu knocked on the door and peeked in. You ready? Isabella turned, her eyes filled with doubt. I don't know if I can do this, Keanu. He walked up to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. Isabella, you've already done the hardest thing. You survived. This is just telling your story. She let out a shaky breath. What if they don't listen? Keanu smiled. Then we make them listen. He offered her his arm. Let's go change some lives. The gala was exactly what Isabella imagined, big, fancy, and overwhelming. Rich people in designer clothes sipped their drinks and laughed politely. Everything felt perfect and polished. Isabella felt like she didn't belong. But then she saw Keanu talking to people, introducing her, making sure they knew who she was. Slowly, the fear inside her started to fade. Then it was time for her to speak. She took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The room went silent as she stepped up to the microphone. Her hands shook. But when she looked out at the crowd, she didn't see rich business people or famous politicians. She saw the women in her workshop. She saw Rosa and Naomi and Henry. She saw herself. And she spoke. She told them what it felt like to be invisible, to be homeless, to feel like the world had given up on her. She told them about Keanu finding her and reminding her she still had worth. She told them about the sewing workshop and the women fighting to rebuild their lives. By the time she finished, the whole room was silent. Then, slowly, people stood up. Applause filled the ballroom. People wiped their eyes, touched by her words in a way they hadn't expected. Isabella let out a breath she hadn't even realized she was holding. She had done it. She had made them listen. After the gala, people came forward, offering to help. They wanted to fund the workshop, expand it, and create more chances for homeless women to rebuild their lives. Isabella's mission was growing faster than she had ever dreamed. As she and Keanu walked out of the ballroom that night, she turned to him, her eyes full of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you, Keanu," she said. "For everything." He smiled. "You already have, Isabella. By proving the world can change one life at a time." Isabella looked up at the night sky, breathing in the cool air. For the first time in years, she wasn't worried about where she would sleep. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. And she knew this was only the beginning. In the days after the gala, Isabella's story spread everywhere. The speech she had given, her honest words about survival and second chances, had touched people far beyond that room. A video of her speech had gone viral. People from all over the world reached out. Some wanted to help. Others shared their own stories of homelessness and struggle. Isabella was no longer just the woman Keanu Reeves had helped. She was a symbol of hope. Her workshop, which had started as a small project, was now something much bigger. Donations poured in, allowing them to move to a bigger space, hire more teachers, and help even more women. But Isabella didn't stop there. She and Keanu worked together to expand their mission. They partnered with shelters, job programs, and mental health experts. They didn't just want to teach homeless women a skill. They wanted to give them a future. More workshops opened in other cities. Each one carried Isabella's story. She wasn't just helping women find jobs, she was helping them find dignity. One afternoon, Isabella sat in the workshop, flipping through an old photo album. Inside were pictures from a life she had lost, a life before everything fell apart. Keanu walked in and noticed her quiet expression. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sitting across from her. Isabella traced a photo with her finger. It was her and her husband, taken many years ago. "I never thought I'd be here. I thought my story was over." Keanu smiled gently. "But it wasn't." She looked up at him. "No, it wasn't. But I had to lose everything before I could start again." Keanu nodded. He understood. He had lost people too. His father, his best friend, his partner. He knew what it was like to rebuild from pain. Isabella closed the album. "There's something I need to do." "What's that?" Keanu asked. She took a deep breath. "I need to visit my husband's grave." Keanu reached for her hand. "Then let's go." They drove to a peaceful cemetery. The trees swayed gently in the wind. Isabella hadn't been here since the day he was buried. She had been too busy trying to survive. Now she was ready. She knelt by his grave, tracing the letters of his name. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I couldn't save you. And after you were gone, I couldn't save myself either." Keanu stood back, giving her space. He understood that some goodbyes take years to be spoken. Isabella closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "But I'm okay now. I found my way back." She turned to Keanu. "He would have liked you." Keanu smiled. "I would have liked him too." As they walked back to the car, Isabella felt lighter. The grief was still there, but it no longer held her down. That night, Isabella and Keanu sat outside watching the stars. "Do you ever wonder why life brought us back together?" Isabella asked. Keanu thought for a moment. "I don't think it was an accident." Isabella smiled. "Neither do I." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you, Keanu. For everything." He squeezed back. "You saved me first." And under the night sky, they both knew this wasn't just a story about second chances. It was a story about kindness, love, and never giving up. And it was far from over. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.